Hi Scouts, I'm Mr. Rowland. I'm one of the adult volunteers with your local troop. We haven't had a chance to be introduced to one another due to the coronavirus. I hope you're all doing well. I put together this little video presentation to help get you some information so that you will be able to get your Firem'n Chit when we get back together. I've broken it up into 3 separate parts. I don't want you to get overwhelmed and bored and tune out. This is all very important information that you need and you will use throughout your scouting career. The first part is just going to be the general rules and regulations that the scouts want you to know as far as being able to use, possess, and build campfires. The second part, we're going to go into actual hands-on, how do you do it? And then in the third part, we're actually going to go a little bit beyond what the Boy Scout manual talks about. They pretty much rely on matches and or lighters, which I'm all sure right now you can all start a fire with a match or a lighter, but we want to go on to push ourselves and maybe try to start a fire with just a spark. So sit back, hold on, and let's get started. Welcome back. Now that we're ready to go, I want to give you the information that the Scouts want you to know to earn your Firem'n Chit. I'm going to read exactly what they have put out for us as far as their requirements. Number 1, they says, I have read and understand the use and safety rules from the Scouts BSA handbook. On page 231 of your manual, there's a section, it's 3/4 of one page, that talks about all their concerns with using a campfire. 2, I will build a campfire only when necessary and when I have the necessary permits. Regulations vary by locality. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Scouts would like to utilize camp stoves as opposed to campfires. Why? Camp stoves are quicker to set up, quicker to use, quicker to take down than a campfire. They have less impact on the environment. However, sometimes a campfire is more appropriate than a stove. If you have to dry your clothes, for building camaraderie, teamwork in the evenings, sitting around the camp stove, versus sitting around a campfire, people would rather sit around the campfire and talk. 3, I will minimize campfire impacts or use existing fire lays consistent with the principles of leave no trace. I will check to see that all flammable material is cleared at least 5 foot in all directions from the fire for a total of 10 feet. Well, what does that mean? I will minimize the campfire impact. Well, when you go to build a campfire at your campsite, you want to minimize the damage that you're going to do to nature, because fire will damage nature no matter what. So if there's an existing fire ring, you would obviously use that. You wouldn't go out to bare ground somewhere and start a brand new fire because it's convenient. So if and where we usually camp, there are existing fire pits, fire rings, that's where the fire is to be built. And you build the fire to the size you need, not the size you want. I know we all want to have the big bonfire that you could see from space. That's not appropriate. You build the fire that you need, the size you need for the task at hand. If you're cooking, you need a fire that's going to be big enough to cook whatever food product you need to place over it. When you do go to build these fires in the fire pits, you need to make sure that outside of your fire ring, 5 feet all the way around, is clear of all flammable debris. pine needles, leaves, sticks, twigs. Why? Because fires throw embers, throw sparks. They land outside the fire ring. If you have combustible material outside and these sparks and embers land on them, there's a potential for your fire to get out of control real fast, and that nobody wants. Fire is a useful tool when it's contained and when it's used properly. When it's out of control, it can become an absolute nightmare. So, how far is 5 foot? Rough guesstimate, put your hands above your head from the tip of your fingers to the tip of your toes is well over 5 foot. So if you put your feet on the outside of the fire ring, you need to clear all the way around from the tips to the tips of your fingers, okay? Better safe than sorry. Let's see. Next, I will safely use and store fire starting material. Well, there's some common sense. You don't want to leave your fire starting material out where people who have not been trained can get access to it. This includes family members, your friends, younger scouts, because when you guys progress up through the ranks, there will be brand new scouts who have not earned their chit, and they may say, oh, well, here's a lighter. So-and-so left it sit here. Let's start the fire. I know how to do it. That's not appropriate. You keep your materials separate. 5, I will see that the fire is attended to at all times. Now here's a big one. Everybody wants to make a fire. Everybody gets very bored very quickly and wants to go and do something else. Well, if you've made the fire, someone has to stay and attend to the fire for a couple reasons. One, you make a fire, you have to make sure primarily that it stays contained, that it doesn't get too big, that it doesn't throw sparks, that it doesn't go outside your fire ring. You need to make sure that it stays fed. Oh, we made a fire to cook on. Well, in 10 minutes it went out, but nobody was there to see it. Now you have to start from scratch. So someone needs to be present at the fire at all times. This is why stoves are so much nicer, because once you set it up, it's literally instantaneous heat once you put the match or the fire stick to it. You can cook on it, you shut off the tank, you shut it down, it's done. You can put it away. You don't have to sit there and watch it. Because when you build a fire, from the time that you put the match to it, light it, till it is completely out, someone needs to be in attendance. 6, I will make sure that water and or a shovel is readily available. Why? That is your fire prevention tools right there. And under that, it also says, I will promptly report any wildfire to the proper authorities. That should go without saying. But you need to have a method to contain your fire should it get too big too fast. If you put the wrong materials on it and it flares up and gets a lot bigger than you intended it to, you have to have some water nearby so you can start dousing it to knock the flames down. A shovel, spread it out, throw some dirt on it, tamp the fire down so it's contained. And it's also useful to put out any spot fires that would, or embers that would jump outside of your fire ring. I will use the cold out test to make sure the fire is cold out, and will make sure the fire lay is clean before I leave. This is a skill that is probably not practiced as much as it should be. You don't just take 5 gallons of water and dump it on your fire and assume it's out. Just because you don't see flames doesn't mean it's out. Coals retain a lot of heat for a long time. So if you took 5 gallons of water, dumped it right on your fire, you're going to get a huge plume of steam. And when you're over top dumping the bucket, the steam comes up real quick, and you can end up with steam burns, blisters all over. Now you get to practice your first aid merit badge. Not what you want. So what they suggest you do is you start sprinkling the water over your fire. Take your shovel, take a stick, start stirring the coals. So that if you have a layer of coals this thick from an all-day fire, and you wet the top half, and the water penetrates down and puts the top half out, this lower half is still hot, is still able to reignite a fire. So they want you to spread the coals out, douse it, mix it, start stirring it up. So you bring the coals from the bottom that may not have gotten any water or any dirt, bring them to the top, sprinkle them again and again and again and again, so that when you put your hand over top of these coals, you feel no heat. That is out cold. And that you will follow the outdoor code and the principles of leave no trace and tread lightly. And this all goes to minimizing the impact of your fire. So what is the outdoor code? The outdoor code can be found in your Scout manual. It consists of 4 parts. And it goes, as an American, I will do my best to be clean in my outdoor manners, be careful with fire, be considerate in the outdoors, and be conservation minded. So those are the 4 C's of the outdoor code. Right now, the one that we're concerned with is the second C, be careful with fire. So, and it's also going to tie into the leave no trace. We don't want to impact nature in an adverse way. That's why we build fires in the fire ring, in the fire pits where they are appropriate. And it is not always appropriate to build a fire, especially out west during drought season. You may not be allowed to build a fire at all in national parks, and those will be posted as you enter the park as to the risk of fire. And sometimes even the use of stoves is not permitted, depending upon the dryness of the area. So let's all keep that in mind going forward, to just hit the high points of what they want you to know. Build fires when it's appropriate and where it's appropriate. Use the existing fire pits, existing fire rings, or pack one in. If you have to make one, you can make one by putting non-combustible material in a circle. You clear all combustible material away from at least 5 feet all the way around your fire pit. Always look around to the left, to the right, and above to see that there are no low-hanging branches or something that the heat may ignite. You build your fire to the appropriate size. You make sure you have extinguishing tools nearby and readily available. Bucket of water, shovel. You light your fire, somebody stays and babysits the fire. You never leave a fire unattended. And when you're done at the end, you make sure that it is cold out by using your fire extinguishing tools to douse the fire, stir the coals, douse them again until you can put your hand over the coals and you feel no heat. So let's go and move on to the second part. The fuel we're going to be using is primarily going to be wood, and it can be broken up into 3 main categories. We are going to have the tiniest slivers of wood, no bigger than a toothpick, hopefully even smaller. This is called tinder. This is what you are going to put the match to catch first, because size on size, if you have a flame off of your match that's this big and you have a piece of wood that's this big, there's not enough heat in that match to start and keep this piece of fuel burning. This, however, is going to be easily lit by a match or a lighter. So this is tinder, and it's from the size of dust up to maybe the size of a toothpick. And you want your fuel to be as dry as possible. The next step up is going to be kindling. Kindling is the next size, and it will go from the size of a toothpick up to maybe the size of a pencil. So when you're building your fire, your tinder will be the first thing lit. Once the tinder gets moving and consumed, it will generate a lot of heat, which will be able to get the larger pieces. Tinder, kindling, ignited. And above kindling, we have fuel. So, one thing you can do is, if you have a large source of fuel, a big chunk of wood, but no tinder, once you earn your totem chit, you can utilize a knife to shave this down and make yourself as much tinder as is needed, or as much kindling as is needed. Let's talk about making a fire. So what are we going to use to bring that capability into the woods? How are we going to bring fire with us? Well, let's keep it simple. First and foremost, matches. Everybody here should know at this point how to utilize matches. They're either paper matches or wooden matches. They contain an ignitable source on one end and a consumable fuel on the other. Here, the red is the ignitable source and the paper is the consumable fuel. Good and bad about them? Well, they're very small, they're very tiny, they're very reliable, but especially with your paper matches, if they get wet, they're no good. Even drying them out, not good. They require this little strip to ignite because there are two chemical compounds. One is on the red head of the match, the other is on the strike surface on the packet. And the two need to combine to create the fire. Now, some of your matches, they say strike anywhere. You don't need the side of the box. You just need a rough surface. If you look closely, there are two different colors on this match head. Those are your two chemical compounds. Rubbing them together on a rough surface will cause this to ignite. But once again, if it gets wet, not so good for you. That's why you always want to keep your fire starting materials dry. In a specialized container, like some of these that have a gasket, and you can keep the water out. This is a multi-functional piece. It has a compass, a safety whistle. Or you can go low-tech and just use a Ziploc bag. What's the other tool that we're going to be using a lot of? The lighter. reliable, easy to use, easy to transport. If it gets wet, shake it off and it'll still work. We also use these for our stoves, the electric match or whatever they want to call them. Big and bulky though for a backpack if you're doing backpack hiking, compared to this lighter, compared to the match, compared to. Also, you have these lighters, a Zippo brand flip top. The problem with a lot of your lighters, what you are trying to light is on the ground. What you have in your hand is the fire. You need to get your fire to the ground, to what you're trying to light. The problem with the fire is it always wants to go up. So when you go to rotate this, it goes right up into your finger. Plus, this little shield is metal. And even if you manage to get it, shoot it down into what you're trying to light, look where that fire is, on that metal windshield. So do you think that might get about 1,000 degrees and put a nice burn on you when you grab it, when you're done? So, lighters of both types, it's hard to get that fire to go down. That's where this guy, I think, is a little bit easier to use, because you can face him down. It stays lit, but you don't really carry these in your backpack. So, matches, that's usually the way you go. You strike it, you light it. Once you get it protected from the wind, move it to your tinder, put the whole match in there, and it's good to go. So, let's move outside and we will actually demonstrate some of our fire building techniques. Okay, we're back. Fuel, 2x4 block of wood. Oxygen, we're here on Earth. Heat, MAP gas, with a flame at over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we put A, B, combined with the air, I don't have a fire, I got smoke. What happened? Well, in much the same way that if you have all the ingredients to make a cake and you throw them all willy-nilly into a bowl and toss it into an oven, you're going to get an inedible pile of slop. There's technique and preparation that needs to go into all your ingredients. You need them in the right shape, the right amounts, and prepared the right way to get your fire. So, let's talk about campfires. Okay, so let's talk about our campfires. Primarily, there are two types that we are going to discuss. They are the teepee and the log cabin method. What are the two? The log cabin method is a good method for getting your fire up off the ground when the conditions are wet and less than desirable. You take two larger logs the size of your wrist, place them in your campfire ring, which we're going to say this is the ring for demonstration purposes. Then you take some kindling and you place it between the two. And what you're doing is you're making a bed on which to build your fire. That way it's up off the ground, not coming in contact with anything. We're going to utilize this little bundle of paper as our tinder bundle, that which we are going to use to start our fire. And that could be super fine twigs, pine needles, whatever. And then you take and, like Lincoln logs, you stack in a log cabin fashion around the outside, building your fire. Ignite the source on the inside. The oxygen comes through from underneath. It's not in contact with the wet ground. The fire gets started here. The heat transfers to the outside. And as you keep stacking, you'll stack them closer and closer so that the heat coming up from the fire in the center will start to heat the logs on the outside of your fire. This fire is good for cooking. Will provide a nice bed of coals. And once again, it's good for wet situations. Okay, the second type, which is my primary go-to, is the teepee. Benefits of this is that air can easily get into this fire and help it to get going fast. It's your quintessential campfire. So let's get started. So you would make a pile of your tinder, and then you start stacking your smaller, they're not going to stick into the plywood, your smaller kindling over top. You ignite the tinder, the heat transfers up to your kindling, and this fire requires a tiny bit of patience because you can't just dump massive amounts of fuel on it. You will smother the fire. So once the smaller kindling gets started, you can start adding a little bit larger pieces. And larger pieces, etc., etc. And if you look at it, it sort of resembles the teepee shape. If this was softer material, we could stick these, and these weren't smooth, but they had rough surfaces where they would do a little bit of gripping to each other. They would be sticking up more in your teepee shape, like so. Okay, so those are the two types of fires, and I refer you back to your Boy Scout manual. If you look in your manual, they will have more detailed descriptions on the two types of fires. If you're interested, check out the internet. There are other types of fires that aren't covered in your manual: the Swedish log, the keyhole fire, the lean-to, and they all have their benefits and their shortcomings. So let's move on to ignition sources. So how do we carry our fire building material? Well, you want to keep it dry. Whatever you take, keep it dry. That's the main rule. Wet stuff doesn't burn. That's why they use water to put out fires. What do you need? Do you need some full-blown gasketed box? No. It can be something as simple as a Ziploc bag. Unless you're planning on being submerged underwater, the water that you're going to come across is pretty much going to be rain, maybe You roll a canoe and you got to pull your pack out. A Ziploc bag will suffice. If you're paranoid, double bag it. Well, what do you carry to start a fire in your fire starting kit? Well, we need our primary source of ignition, which is probably going to be the lighter or your matches. And then always have a plan B, because sometimes plan A is going to fail. You're going to run out of fluid, you're going to forget to fill it, so then you have some backups, some matches. And you can carry your matches in little containers, some like this little Boy Scout container. They fit right inside, and this has other bells and whistles, a compass, a whistle, and such. This one here has an O-ring gasket to make sure it stays waterproof. This one here is just your standard metal container, and it will confer some water resistance, but it will in no way make it waterproof. What else should we carry? Well, a good idea is a fire extender, some sort of tinder that you can be guaranteed will be dry and will be able to start. So what type of tinder is available? Well, there's commercially available fire starters, which is pretty much small particle board impregnated with a wax. And you would put the match to the corner of this. It's perforated so you can break off as small a chunk as you need. Once this catches, you set it down, build your fire around it. As far as some scouting tips, this one I really like. The Vaseline impregnated cotton ball. The Vaseline is a petroleum product, an oil. The cotton ball will act as a wick and a delivery vessel. And they're easy to make. You can find ways of doing it online. But this one here, the only thing I will say, there is so much Vaseline in this, you cannot get it to light without flicking up a section of the cotton ball. Let's see if we can see that. And making it into a little wick. Once you light that, this will burn for about 7 minutes. Should give you plenty of heat, plenty of time to get your fire started. Another way that you can make homemade tinder bundle is the egg carton dryer lint. You can also pack in any type of tinder material you want. This is just some dryer lint kept in a container to try to keep it dry, because when it comes to making a fire, water is not your friend. What about Mother Nature? Will Mother Nature provide you with tinder? Yes, if you know where to look. And I've gone out and I've gathered some material that I would think would make pretty decent tinder. Now, when you're gathering your material, you don't want items that are laying on the ground if you can avoid it, because the ground has moisture in it, and even though it may be a sunny day, the ground is producing the moisture that is going to keep whatever you're picking up off the ground damp. If you can find something that's up off the ground, a branch that is dead, that is suspended in air, those would be preferable. And the smaller, the better. Now, what I like to do is, even though, oh, this is super fine and super thin, if it doesn't snap, it may not be like that. It may not be the very best at becoming your tinder, because if it bends, there's moisture in it. Even though it may look dead, maybe you should bypass that and keep moving on to other material. If it snaps, save it. So what types of materials can we use? Okay, so what material will Mother Nature provide for you? Well, you can use, we've got leaves, we've got dried grasses, and tiny, tiny vegetation. The tinier, the better. Once you're comfortable starting fires, utilizing matches and lighters, I would encourage you to push yourself to start utilizing other techniques that maybe just produce a spark or an ember, and try to start fires that way. Mother Nature will provide a lot of tinder. If you're lucky and it's not been a rainy day, there are ways to source dry tinder even in rainy and wet conditions. I would encourage you to search out these, talk to your local scout leaders, your older scouts in your troop, learn from their experiences, what to do, what not to do, what works, what doesn't work. Retain the information and pass it on to the younger scouts when you become the older Life and Star Scouts, and hopefully Eagle. But yeah, so we're going to go through a couple demonstrations of what's available to make sparks and embers, and we'll produce hopefully a quick demo here for you. So I have not had a lot of success with the magnesium block that we've all seen at our local stores. And from what I've been able to ascertain, a lot of these ones that we get around here, they're too hard. There are magnesium bars out there that are made for the military in their packs. Doan is the company, or Doan's is the company that, and they are a lot softer than these bars here. The way they operate, you take and use the back of your knife, or they come with this scraper saw wannabe attached to it. What I've seen is people on the internet have taken a hacksaw blade, wrap the handle part in duct tape. This gives you a lot more surface to control your saw than this guy, because now you're holding it by the teeth, trying to work and rub against it. So, and the purpose of the duct tape is you can unroll some of it, because the last thing you want to be doing, you make this great big pile and a gust of wind goes by and blows it to the four corners of the earth. So what they say, if you have a nice roll of duct tape, not only does it act as a handle, but you can unroll a section of it, stick it to the ground, and when you are trying to produce your shavings, they stay in one place, the wind won't blow them, and not only that, duct tape's flammable. Okay, so we've got some shavings here, and then there's a ferro rod attached to the back side where you're supposed to throw sparks. But what are we noticing? That magnesium really isn't catching all that well. Okay, well, let's cheat a little bit. Where did I leave? Aha. Ta-da. All right. So magnesium is supposed to ignite and burn at a ridiculously hot temperature. Okay. And you're supposed to get it to start with that spark. What about with flame? Well, we got a little flash. Where's the magnesium? I see the little. There are shavings on there. I managed to melt the tape, but the shavings remain unlit. And this is what I've seen demonstrated a lot throughout the internet and on YouTube. There have been people that have produced a decent sized pile of shavings and put matches to them, and it gets, like you saw here, the occasional flare up. But when you compare that to the Doan's bar, it's a lot softer. You can see when they're shaving it, it doesn't come off in tiny little flakes like that. So just so you know, Scouts beware. Better than nothing, but far from great in my book. We've discussed the shortcomings of the magnesium bar. What other ways are there to start a fire? Well, binary compounds. Chemical A, chemical B, mixed together, create an exothermic reaction, produces heat, produces flames. I'm not a big fan. They're liquid, one's a liquid, and I'm a little leery that if they leak, they're going to cause nothing but problems, and I don't want a fire starting in my pack. They're also a little big and bulky. What else do we have? The ferro rod. That's this little bar that you see here. Oops, there we are. On your magnesium bar, the one that I like is this. It's tiny, but for my purpose that I use it for, to start the char cloth, it's excellent. And these are utilized by taking a piece of steel, not your blade, but maybe the back of your knife, and sliding it now. Two things you want to be careful of. It took a while, but you see here, this black is a protective coating. So you have to scrape through that protective coating to get to the actual ferrocinium of the rod. And yes, I understand if you're scraping this way, the blade is up towards you, so you could potentially hog off your knuckle. But you really don't want to take and scrape utilizing your blade, because that is the whole purpose of having a knife, is to cut things. So that is why they give you this little handy widget. Take a piece of steel and it sends sparks down to your tinder bundle, and you may have to do it you will have to do it multiple times to get enough heat to ignite whatever it is that's in your tinder bundle. Which, that's why you want to start with as fine a material as possible. So let's move on to probably my favorite, char cloth. Okay, so let's discuss char cloth, my personal favorite. What is it? Pretty much it is 100% cotton fabric, burned in the absence of oxygen, leaving you a carbon-based tinder. So, how do you make it? Where do you buy it? You make it? And it's fairly simple. And I will suggest strongly that you try all these methods beforehand. Don't wait until you're out in the middle of the field and you want to try for the very first time to use natural tinder and a spark to make a fire. Maybe bring it up at a troop meeting that, hey, we'd like to practice. That's the only way you get good at things. Practice, practice, practice. So, what is it? Well, it's 100% cotton. Can't emphasize that enough. 100% cotton. Not synthetics, not spandex, not cotton. Cloth. This is what I started with. This was actually a triangular bandage. And I'll show you the char cloth that it made and its shortcomings. So how do we make it? This is a little metal box. Gee, I wonder what the company is. Altoids. Took a nail, drove a little hole right in the center of it. That's it. Then you take a few pieces of your cloth that you cut up. This is what I tend to use now. Washcloth. Why? Noticeably more substantial than this wispy cloth. Provides a lot longer ember and more heat. Makes it more idiot proof. Gives you more of an opportunity to have a successful fire. So you put a few pieces in your Altoids box, close it up, and I have a little camp stove that you set the box on. You could set it on your barbecue, on a fire pit, and you wait. And if you're interested, YouTube has numerous videos on people who make these. You'll start to see smoke come out of the little hole. Maybe you even see a little flame the size of a candle pop out of here. Let it go. On my little propane stove, I'm going to guess a few minutes. Once the fire goes out, within a minute after that, get a pair of tongs, grab the box, set it aside, don't open it. I made that mistake. I wanted to see, did I make it? Did it go right this time? As soon as you crack that lid, there's so much heat in there, the massive influx of oxygen starts the char cloth burning. And all your work is literally going up in smoke. So, once it cools down after about 2 or 3 minutes, you open it up. What you're going to have looks just like this. So this is the actual washcloth that I used. So from this to this, it looks identical except for the change in color. And I store it in tiny waterproof containers because you do not want these to get wet. Now, what's the problem with the first batch that I made? Well, I found out it was too thin. It worked well, it made nice char cloth, but it didn't produce an ember that lasted long enough for me and my limited skill set to produce a fire. So let's see if we can get you guys a little bit closer to the action so you can see what's going to happen here. Okay, so here we have our char cloth, and once we add a spark to it, you will see that it does not go out. That spark will continue throughout this entire piece of fabric. That will give you the ember that you need to start your fire. And with this, what I like about this is it directs the sparks right where you want it, which is right on that fabric. Okay. Now you can see, let's see, let me move this over. You can see where the sparks have started, and it is actually consuming the char cloth. And if you were to blow on it, that will give you a nice ember. And there's nothing you can do to stop this short of cutting it. It's going to consume this entire piece of fabric. So let's put this in the fireplace. Okay, so we're going to work on trying to prepare an actual tinder bundle. So we're going to put down some leaves on the very bottom, some dry leaves, and some super fine plant vegetation that is dry and very tiny. And what you're trying to do is literally you're trying to build a nest. Okay. And what's the nest going to do? The nest is going to take whatever spark or ember that you are able to make and you're going to put it right in the center, and then you're going to close your tinder bundle around it, blow into it to add oxygen, and hopefully that will give you the makings of a fire. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a fire already made and set up, because once this ignites, you are not going to have time to do anything to prep your fire. So it has to be prepped ahead of time. So what I like to use is char cloth. And we've talked about how to make it. So there's a piece of it. At one time it was a washcloth, a 100% cotton washcloth. So we're going to set that right in the middle. And then I'm going to use this little device to put some sparks into the char cloth, and hopefully with a little bit of luck, there we go. Okay, so it has caught. I don't know if you can see in there. Okay, and there you go. Fire. Yay! And there was much rejoicing. Now, is it a guaranteed success all the time? No. And you want to do this right next to your fire, because you've got fire in your hands. Unless your hands are made of asbestos, you're not going to want to carry this at all. Okay? So that's pretty much where we are right now. And you can see it has almost burned itself out. So it'll provide you that bundle. It will provide you with enough heat to start a fire, but you have to be diligent and you have to be precise in your movements. Everything needs to be prepped ahead of time. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. So that is starting a fire from an ember. And for me, that's one of the easiest ways to do it. There are other ways available. I have not had a lot of luck with some of the other ways, but that's my take on how to start a fire from an ember. Okay, so let's talk about a fuzz stick. What is that? Well, if you don't have fine tinder and you have earned your totem chit, you can use your pocket knife to turn larger, less desirable pieces of kindling into finer pieces of tinder. So all you're going to do is start shaving around and around and around and around, and work your way up, producing very fine shavings that are attached to the main piece of kindling. Because a match may not have enough heat to start this, but it will have enough heat to start the fine shavings that you've produced. And that goes without saying that you can utilize your knife to produce tinder This is where a sharp knife comes in handy. And you can do this with a lot of pieces, stack them all together. You can shave the pieces off and then gather them together. Put them on top of an ignition source to feed your fire. But the fuzz stick method, they are to stay attached to the main stick, so that when you light these smaller pieces, they burn. Okay, and in wrapping up, I'd like to once again encourage all of you to dive into your Scout manual, read up on fire making techniques, the do's and don'ts. Keep these front and center in your mind anytime you are working with fire. Be safe. If you're interested in further techniques, the internet is loaded with people who enjoy bushcraft and have a much broader skill set, and they bring different techniques than are covered in our Scout manual. And I would encourage you all to try. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your Firem'n Chit.